Hey, I want to welcome Congressman Rodney Davis. Thanks so much for taking some time this evening to chat with us. For our viewers watching on Facebook, thank you for tuning in as well. You can submit questions. We'll try to make this a very fluid conversation. You can submit your questions. We'll try to relay those to Congressman Davis. So thank you again, Congressman Davis, for joining us. How are you this evening?
I'm doing great. It's been a great time here in the district, traveling around today, visited a career and technical education center in Springfield, Illinois. Got to see some of our best and brightest that are going into the trades and getting that education while they're in high school. Great opportunity.
So we got about 30 minutes with you, and we have some questions here that I've written, as I said, that we'll get some viewer questions as well as this goes over for the next 30 minutes. But you were elected by voters in 2012, so you are seeking your 4th term in the Illinois 13th District. Why do you want to do this again?
You know what? Actually running for my 5th term. I'm excited about that. And actually, because there's a lot of work that we still need to do. You know, back in 2012, I promised the voters that I would be a bipartisan voice in Washington. I'm happy to report I've lived up to that promise. I'm ranked the 13th most bipartisan member of the House out of 435 members. I'm the most bipartisan member in the state of Illinois, Republican or Democrat. I said I was going to go to Washington and stop the never-ending farm bill extensions, write good ag policy for our farmers, producers, and manufacturers. I've done that twice in the last 7.5 years I've been in Congress. I've also helped bring transportation and infrastructure projects by working on those issues as a top priority. But one of my other issues that I promised I would tackle, we got finished. It was attacking our student loan debt crisis in this country, Corey. We have right now more student loan debt than auto and credit card debt combined. This is an issue that is important to the future of our country and important to those new grads that are coming out of colleges and getting into the workforce. Our employers can help pay down their student debt now, be incentivized to do it. And as a matter of fact, the employees will be able to not pay taxes on the first $250 of that. Huge win. Promises made, promises kept.
And Mr. Davis, we're going to talk about issues in just a moment. But before we get into some more other issues, I want to ask you about the state of our country. I think you walk on the streets, people are talking about it. There's so much division in our country right now. So how would you characterize the state of the country, and what can you specifically do to help heal a lot of this division that we're seeing?
Well, that's been something I've been trying to lead on in Washington since the day, unfortunately, June 14th of 2017, when a crazed gunman from right across the river from you in Belleville, Illinois, came to a baseball field in Alexandria, Virginia, while I was up to bat and my colleagues were out in the field, and started firing at us and trying to kill us. Obviously, you and I spoke later on that week or early that next week when you were doing the morning show, Corey, and I witnessed my friends, thankfully, they all survived, but they were shot that morning. It was very frustrating to me because it's well known that gentleman, he had a political grievance with us. He asked a fellow member of Congress who was leaving if we were Republicans or Democrats, and he screamed healthcare while he was trying to kill us all. That's not a way to settle political grievances. You know, we can settle them at the ballot box, but in the end, we've got to do better as a country. We can't accept any violence and any criminal behavior as okay.
There's a lot of different tones, especially coming from the White House via Twitter. Is that helping at all help heal our country?
Well, unfortunately, Twitter has become the mode of communication and really, the basis of questions that we answer all the time. But I'll give you my perspective, Corey, about Washington. There are good people on both sides of the aisle. And I wouldn't have such a high bipartisan ranking if some of the folks on the other side of the aisle weren't my best friends. And as a matter of fact, that morning that we were shot at, my phone got left on the field in my bag of catcher's equipment. So I didn't get a chance to answer the phone calls or answer the texts from many of my Democratic colleagues who were worried to death that we got hurt. And that's what I see. I see the good. Unfortunately, the 24-hour news cycle, they want to fight on where we disagree, but 99% of what we do in Washington is done in an overwhelmingly bipartisan fashion, but that doesn't get ratings.
In the spirit of unity and bipartisanship, your opponent in this race, Betsy Durskin-Lonergan, say something nice about her.
Well, I just did a debate with her on Monday night. I appreciate her tenacity. I mean, it takes tenacity to be able to run for Congress and not win and then come at it again. And I appreciate that. I mean, I don't know many people that would be willing to do that again. And she is. And I look forward to the campaign, the exchange of ideas, the exchange of our vision for America in this district. And I look forward to placing our names on the ballot to see who wins. And I'm confident that we're going to be able to be victorious again.
Before we move to COVID, talking about the pandemic that we're all going through right now, I do want to remind our Facebook viewers, if you do have a question, be sure to submit it right there in the comments page and or the comments section. And we'll be sure to get that to Mr. Rodney Davis. Let's move to COVID, because obviously it has changed all of our lives. And like you, President Trump contracted COVID-19. I want to go back to what the president had said recently after leaving the hospital. He said it's not to be feared and compared it to the flu. Do you agree with him on that statement?
Well, I don't think we need to live in fear of the disease. I think we've learned so much more about this disease since this pandemic began. And remember, it was a disease that no one on earth knew existed even a year ago. I think we need to celebrate the good things that the president talked about, be it the therapeutics that he was able to get. Many Americans who are facing a tougher road than I faced as almost asymptomatic COVID diagnosis myself. And we need to celebrate where we are as a country because of the bipartisanship that we exhibited at the beginning of this pandemic to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in therapeutic development, vaccine development. And we have 30,000 Americans volunteered and are actively in clinical trials for a vaccine. You know, what frustrates me, Corey, is that we've got seemingly now a political litmus test on the use of therapeutics and vaccines. This isn't about the president. This isn't about the Democrats in Washington and Nancy Pelosi, who, commonly says Republican policies want to kill people. That's not good for America. That's not who America is. And as somebody who had COVID, and I'm watching the president go through it and others, I certainly want to see the good in our COVID fight in this country rather than just putting a political litmus test on it.
Do you think testing has been available widespread to enough communities throughout our country in a fast enough amount of time?
No, obviously not. I mean, it's not enough at all, but it's a lot better than where we were just a few short months ago. I mean, look at this pandemic. I mean, nobody on earth knew the disease existed a year ago. And we went from not knowing about this disease to ratcheting up the availability of diagnostic testing throughout this country substantially. You come to my district, you go in the St. Louis area where you are, companies like Walgreens have set up rapid scan facilities to allow people like me and my constituents and your viewers to go get that rapid scan test, even if they're asymptomatic, because they may have exhibited a symptom or may have been exposed. We're doing better, but we need to take it up another notch too. We need to start testing for antibodies because there are millions of Americans that probably have already had this disease and never known it. And we need to get a true statistical analysis of the impact of COVID-19 on our country so we can make good policy decisions going into the future.
You go county by county, state by state, and there's different rules everywhere, whether there's a mask mandate, there's not a mask mandate. But on the federal level, there's not been a mask mandate. Do you think the leadership needed to come from the federal and needs to come from the federal government in order to us all get on the same page, especially when doctors are saying masks work?
No, I mean, we don't need the federal government leading what our localities know is best. As a matter of fact, I'm for local control. I was for Governor Pritzker in Illinois, breaking the state down into regions, and he's done that. The federal government doesn't always know best. Remember, at the beginning of this pandemic, I was told by many of those same medical professionals now who know more about the disease that I should discourage anyone who's healthy from wearing a mask because it was going to cut into our vital PPE shortage that was happening in the global marketplace at the time. So we need to allow local officials to make better decisions that are going to affect their local communities because frankly, every community doesn't face the same risk as others. And they need to have that flexibility to make decisions that are best for them, their constituents, and their own economy.
We're starting to get some questions from our Facebook audience that is watching tonight. So I want to read this one from Patrick. He says, a lot of my family lives in the heart of your district. They're on the fence with you, with Rodney, because they feel the president is at the heart of dividing political ideals. What does Congressman Davis agree with most on when it comes to President Trump? What issue is he most at odds with the president?
Well, I agree that he's put some very good people in place in the federal government. I can't tell you how great it's been to work with secretaries, cabinet secretaries like Sonny Perdue and David Bernhardt and others, Elaine Chao. I mean, these folks actually listened to our concerns. When we were at the beginning of this pandemic, Sonny Perdue's office and Secretary Perdue listened to my ideas about taking surplus produce and dairy products and proteins and putting them into food boxes and getting them to those who were unemployed and needed help fighting hunger issues in middle America. They've done that. And I passed food boxes out with Secretary Perdue in Springfield just a few weeks ago. I want to thank Secretary Bernhardt, who's a Trump appointee as a Secretary of Interior, who listened to me and put the site of the Springfield, Illinois race riots on the African American Civil Rights Network that was created by my good friend, Congressman Lacy Clay. These are the things that we've been able to work with the Trump administration on. Where I disagree with President Trump, I disagree that he walked away from the table on the next round of COVID stimulus bill. We need to fill the holes that still exist from our bipartisan bills that we passed in March and April. There are holes that we need to fill, be it allowing small businesses to access the hundreds of billions of dollars that are left in the PPP program, or allowing our airlines to continue to survive. Because if we don't have an airline industry, we're not going to ever be able to get America to lead in the global marketplace again. And the places that are most affected are going to be airports like Lambert. But this divisiveness just doesn't come from the president and one side. It's Speaker Pelosi and the Democrats, many Democrats, that have said Republicans are trying to kill people. Policy differences that we have are going to lead to the deaths of Americans. Now, we can have our policy differences, but that type of rhetoric leads to somebody who's obviously not mentally stable to come to a baseball field 7 a.m. and decide to scream healthcare and settle his political differences with us with gunfire. So the rhetoric's got to stop on both sides, and it happens on both sides. But unfortunately, a lot of times it's all about what the president tweets, and that's not a good way to judge how great this country is.
Since you brought up PPP, there have been some questions about transparency with the Paycheck Protection Program and making it public who received the taxpayer dollars. You voted against such bill, so why is it a bad idea that the public knows how that tax money is being spent?
Because the bill that I'm being criticized by my opponent for voting against would have been less transparent than the provisions we put in place in the CARES Act that we knew were coming from the Department of Treasury. The sheer fact is every PPP loan above $150,000 can be researched right now by anybody watching this at treasury.gov. Go in, take a look. The bill that my opponent criticizes me for not being transparent enough would have hidden loans below $2 million. And then at that point, my opponent and her Democrat corporate PAC funded allies would have decided to hit me for being less transparent. I'm going to do what's best for the American people, regardless of the political hit jobs that my opponent and her allies want to attack me with. But the bottom line is, the bill that she and the Democrats wanted me to vote for would have ended up being less transparent than where we are today. You know, we worked together in March and April, Corey. It was a great bipartisanship that began this pandemic. But now we get closer to the election. It's just the stupid political gamesmanship that we see. And I think the Democrats and Betsy Londrigan need to be held accountable for supporting less transparency than what I support and many of us in Washington support.
On the subject of PPP, we did get a question from one of our Facebook viewers from Mike Allen. Says, how did your family's McDonald's get money from PPP loans? Is that fair?
Absolutely. The same way that 5 million other American small businesses got it. They went to their local banks and they applied for it. I mean, we have $100 billion plus left in the PPP account from the bills that we passed already. I think we need to allow small businesses to apply for more. There's nothing nefarious about small businesses who were told to close because of COVID and not serve their customers or not serve as many customers. And they've never asked for government help before. And remember, the PPP program requires our small businesses, our mom and pop shops who go to their local banks and they apply. It's not through the federal government. There's no congressional intervention in the PPP program. I would urge you, go talk to your small businesses and you'll see that the process was one that they had to go apply at their local bank for, but they have to meet a set of standards. And the bottom line is that money can't be forgiven in a loan unless they keep people employed. And what's offensive to me is you got my opponent, Betsy Londrigan, whose entire household income and mortgage is paid for by corporate lobbying and corporate lobbyists, criticizing my family, who helped keep over 300 people in this district employed during the pandemic because of a great program that passed with bipartisan support. It's frustrating, but that just goes to show you that some people shouldn't be in Congress when they don't understand anything but what happens in the capital of Springfield, that is one of the most corrupt places that we see in the United States of America, that my opponent feels very comfortable in.
Let's transition our conversation to health care, because that's been a big talking point through political ads back and forth. And we do have a question from one of our viewers, Brian. He says, what will you support to reduce the cost of health care, not insurance, but the actual cost of care incurred by health care providers?
Well, we continue to address that issue on a regular basis. It's not just healthcare, it's prescription drugs. But in the end, I voted for plans that would have lowered premiums. The problem we have in America right now, and my opponent has even said she agrees with this, although in a debate the other night, she seemed to walk back that comment. Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, is leaving 60 million Americans behind. We got to do something. But I don't believe adding more money to the government to run our healthcare system is going to lower premiums. Remember, government promised that most Americans, all Americans, would save an average of $2,600 in healthcare costs with the passage of the Affordable Care Act. Clearly, that's not the case. We have 29 million Americans that still don't have healthcare coverage, Corey. And we have another 31 million that have healthcare coverage, but if they were diagnosed with a pre-existing condition, or any condition for that matter, they wouldn't be able to afford to use it. That's not success. I've actually tried to introduce plans during this pandemic that would allow people to still continue to get their COBRA coverage with a match from the federal government. This is something that's personal to me because my wife is a 21-year cancer survivor. I could not imagine going through that cancer and her subsequent treatments with having to change doctors and change treatment plans. That's not what Americans want. And as a matter of fact, with prescription drugs, this administration has worked with us in Congress to approve thousands of generic patents that are exponentially more than previous administrations. And we've seen the cost of Medicare Part D premiums go down the last 2 years. That says we're making a difference. There's still more we can do. And that's why I want to make sure we find more cures and continue to lower prescription drug costs and healthcare costs for all Americans.
You just talked about the millions of people who currently are not covered under Obamacare, and you said something needs to be done. So what is that something? What is the comprehensive plan by the Republican Party in order to counter Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act?
Well, I voted for a plan called the American Health Care Act in the last Congress. It protected pre-existing condition coverage, something I would never take away because it's so personal to me with my family, my wife, and her genetic form of cancer that could affect my kids and future grandkids. But in the end, the Congressional Budget Office said that premiums would have been lowered. So we did try. It fell short in the Senate. Remember, Democrats said, if you give us control of the House of Representatives, we're going to fix our broken healthcare system. Guess how many votes fixing our healthcare system we have had over the last 2 years under Nancy Pelosi's leadership and speakership in the House? If you guess any more than 0, you're wrong.
You said with your plan that you voted on, the American Health Care Act and protecting pre-existing conditions, but there's been a lot of accounts and a lot of research done about that act, which would have dropped Obamacare's rules, capping how much extra people could be charged and giving that provision, giving a lot more power to the states to be able to do that. So is that really protecting pre-existing conditions in doing that?
I would urge you, Corey, to go in and read the bill. Read the Martha McSally amendment. It doesn't get any more clear than that nothing in this bill could ever take away pre-existing condition coverage for all Americans. I mean, it's pretty simple. Unfortunately, my opponent and her corporate PAC-funded allies continue to lie about my record and our record. But the bottom line is the Congressional Budget Office said premiums would have gone down. So it doesn't make sense to say that they were going to go up when the estimates were our plan would have lowered healthcare costs, would have lowered premiums, and allowed some of those 60 million Americans, and hopefully all of them, to be able to access coverage. It's kind of offensive to me that you have people mischaracterizing what we've done. And it's offensive to my family because pre-existing condition coverage is so personal to us.
So you're saying that these rules capping how much extra people would be charged, you're saying that that's not a true statement about what you voted on?
The Congressional Budget Office is the one that said premiums would have gone down.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about 4 years ago at this time. A lot was going on as we were all getting ready for the November general election. After an Access Hollywood show microphone, obviously a notorious thing that happened here, caught President Trump saying he could kiss and grab women, you rescinded your support for the president and said you couldn't vote for any candidate that November. Has your feeling changed right now?
Yeah, the American people chose President Trump. You know, obviously, I'd never met President Trump before then. And I made my decision. And that was a decision that I made back in 2016. And I got a chance to meet the president and work with the president and his administration after the American people chose him as president. Remember, my job as a member of Congress is not to put a political litmus test on who I work with. My job is to represent my constituents and be effective. And I can tell you this administration and President Trump in particular has shown a willingness to work together to bring our economy back from the doldrums that existed when I first got elected in 2012 and 2013. I mean, we were at historic economic growth, historic low unemployment. The promises that we made and the promises that anybody who's ever run for Congress has made, they were achieved by that economic growth and historic low unemployment. Then the pandemic hit. So I enjoy working with the Trump administration. Matter of fact, I'm a co-chair of his campaign. I don't agree with him 100% of the time. That's clear. I don't agree with anybody 100% of the time. But the bottom line is, Corey, I do my job and work with everyone.
One thing that seems like it's not getting a lot of headlines, but we know that the deficit is growing. How concerned are you about the growing deficit? And clearly, there's so much relief that is necessary for a lot of small businesses, families out there right now. But as we get farther into this thing, I mean, somebody's got to pay for it down the road. So how concerned are you for the growing deficit in our country?
I'm very concerned, Corey. As a matter of fact, if you would have asked me in 2012 when I first ran for this office, if I would cast a vote along with virtually every Republican and every Democrat in the House to spend $2 trillion because of a pandemic that no one was prepared for, Republican or Democrat, I would have said you're crazy. But it needed to be done. We had to act. And you're seeing the benefits of those actions, those bipartisan actions. And we're in a better spot to recover from this pandemic once it's over because of the actions we took. We need to have economic growth. Economic growth, job growth is going to help us address the deficit and the debt. The problem with the debt is, Corey, you know, I've learned pretty quickly that we could shut down government every year over our appropriations bills that are part of our discretionary spending program. It's really only about 25% of the federal government. 75% of spending is on autopilot. You know, we need to work together to make sure our programs that are part of that mandatory spending are there for future generations. That's what I'm hoping to lead on. That's where we need a debate that's going to save those programs for our kids and for our grandkids. I think that's what most seniors want. They want to make sure that Social Security and Medicare is there for the next generation and beyond. And they're sick and tired of being scared by political ad makers and political consultants. And I hear that a lot when I'm out and about in my district too. But those are the things that we need to face, the real drivers of our debt. And when we do, we can have a renewal in America that we haven't seen in our lifetime.
I think some people maybe missed this question at the beginning, but we'll say it again because I think a lot of people are talking about it and a lot of people are concerned about the climate in our country. So John Grady asked, what are you doing about the current political divide we face in America right now? What are you doing specifically about it?
I'm leading the fight by being the most bipartisan member of Congress in the entire Illinois delegation. Somebody who's proudly the 13th most bipartisan member of Congress out of 435. And I'm in the top 3%. I don't only talk the talk, I walk the walk. And what that means is I develop relationships with people across the aisle. And I don't just call them my colleagues, I call many of my friends. And well, we're going to disagree. I'm a proud Republican. And I'm a committed conservative, as the St. Louis Post-Dispatch mentioned when they endorsed me as a Republican just a few days ago. But we can have our differences on policies, but it doesn't mean we can't find that principled compromise. I have a philosophy, Corey, that if I've got a bill that solves about 75 to 80% of the problems that exist, I'm not going to hold out for 100. I'm going to vote to make sure that bill passes. And then I know I only have to attack the 25% that are left that is left in the future. That to me is how a legislator should act. It shouldn't always be about the far ends of the political spectrum. We have our values, we have our principles, but we can govern together too and protect this great country.
I think we got time maybe for one more question, and because it is top of mind recently with different things that have happened in Washington, what about talking about the PPP for families, for small businesses? You said that one of the things that you disagree with President Trump is kind of putting a halt to this help that so many families, so many businesses need right now. So what can you do to make that happen and to really help so many families and so many small businesses?
Well, remember, the PPP program was created so that we could save the small businesses in all of our communities that are the drivers of our perpetual local sales tax revenue. And we wanted to continue to have local economies to go back to after this pandemic. I was disappointed when the president said that he wanted to walk away from negotiations when, frankly, before that, the speaker was the one holding these negotiations up. I'm glad he walked some of those comments back. And I seriously believe that we can come together to open up the already existing, already appropriated hundreds of billions of dollars that we passed in March and April already, and allow small businesses that didn't expect the pandemic to be this long to access those funds. I'm glad that they're back at the table. Secretary Mnuchin and Speaker Pelosi spoke via phone today. I wish they'd all quit playing politics, because really the only thing bipartisan that happened last week in Washington was the bipartisan opposition to the Democrat stimulus bill that passed the House on Thursday. We had every Republican vote no, and we had 18 Democrats join us in voting no on that bill. And I just want to remind the folks watching tonight, in that package were 71 pages of permanent election law changes that would have completely disrupted elections this November in states like Illinois, where I live, that have already begun early voting. That's where the Democrat priorities are. It's implementing policies and procedures like ballot harvesting that have been corrupted already by Republicans and Democrats. That's not addressing pandemic issues. That's putting politics above progress.
Real quick, do you think something gets done before the November election?
I'm a little more optimistic today than I was yesterday, Corey.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Congressman Rodney Davis, thank you so much for joining us on this Facebook chat. And again, next week, I want to remind our Facebook viewers, we will be talking to his opponent, Betsy Durskin-Lonergan. Rodney, thanks again.
Thank you.